This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello there and welcome to episode 88 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking about a topic I really love talking about, and it's about the kindness of strangers. This episode is called Random Acts of Travel Kindness. Now, it's a particularly topical episode for me because as this comes out, I think it'll be just like a day before I head to Japan. And in my experience, Japan is the ultimate place of random acts of travel kindness. In fact, when I lived there for 2 years teaching English. And my friends and I began to learn of something that we used to call gaijin power. So gaijin is the Japanese word for a foreigner. And we really noticed after a while that we had this special gaijin power. For example, I always remember I spent a day in Kyoto doing a bit of sightseeing. I think there was maybe myself and another foreign friend and a Japanese friend, Cheri. And I think she's the one, in fact, who coined the term gaijin power for us. And I remember the three of us were kind of at a bus stop trying to figure out how to get which was the right bus, and Cheri is Japanese, but she was just trying to check out the timetable because we were all living in Osaka, not in Kyoto. And I think, if I remember rightly, we were on our way to see Kinkakuji, the Golden Temple. Anyway, we were kind of, looking around, trying to figure it out. This is pre-smartphone time, so it's a bit more confusing. And out of nowhere, a local Japanese person came up and gave me and my foreign friend free bus tickets. They said, here, have these tickets. They had extra tickets or something. And then they explained to us how to get to the right bus and so on. And our poor Japanese friend Cheri, she didn't get a free ticket because she's just a local. But at least we did find out how to get to the Golden Temple. And it was very funny. But that was gaijin power. I've got another example of gaijin power that I chat about with one of our guests today as well. But it just happened so often, and it sort of seems completely unfair. But that was just to me how typically lovely and kind the Japanese people are. And I'm sure I'll be experiencing that in the next couple of weeks when I'm in Japan again, which I can't wait. Anyway, before we get on to our guests, I need to have a nice, lovely big shout out to our sponsor this month, which is Korea China. So quite relevant because, of course, Korea China helps you find a job teaching English in China, just like I did in Japan. And it's pretty common. It has been even since those days when I did it, but a lot of people combine some longer-term travel with a job, like teaching English. It's a popular way to do it. It's a lot of fun too, I can speak from experience. But it isn't always very easy to pack up and move to another country for work, and it's very useful to have a good partner who can help you out there and find a good job with a reputable company, help you with a legal visa. I have had situations where I was not working legally, and at the time it was scary enough. But looking back now, I think, how could I do that? And all of these other useful parts. Also, when you arrive in a country, someone to meet you at the airport, help you get set up with accommodation, bank accounts, and all of these kinds of things. So Korea China are very useful and helpful at doing this, and very experienced too. So I think if I was off to teach in another country again, especially somewhere where I don't speak the language, like in China, then I would be very, very grateful for Korea China. In fact, the more I talk about them, the more tempted I get just to take off. But don't tell my son that, because he wants to stay in school here for 9 3/4 more years. Well, he doesn't really want to stay in school, but he wants to stay in this school if he has to go to school. So here we go. Now, let me move on to our guest today. Now, my first guest is Matt Eakin from Himalayan Schoolies. Now, you might remember Matt from an earlier episode, and if you want to listen back, it's episode 78 about crossing borders. You might remember, and it's important to note for this story, that when he arrived in Bangladesh, he had a little bit of a visa issue, and it turned out that he sort of managed to sneak his way into the country and accidentally was labelled a diplomat. And that does come up in this story, which is about Matt's further adventures in Bangladesh and some really crazy random acts of travel kindness.
once I arrived in Bangladesh, and then taking around, and so not surprisingly, I'm kind of the person that would just wander off somewhere and try to find an experience. So I decided to go to Estema, this Muslim festival, and see what this was about. And I knew by this stage, I'd learnt some very minor introductory basic conversation words.
Right.
Assalamu alaikum, which is, hello, a greeting. And then I've just got a mental blank at the moment, but a praise be to Allah and a few words like that. And so when I turned up to this festival, and when I say festival, it's just tents. There's just big tents and a little prayer mat, and then you sleep on that. That's it. And you have that much space, and you're there for a week, and then there's some places where you can get some food. But it's very sort of simple living. And so I turned up, and clearly being the only person that's a tourist, and being looked at very weirdly by a lot of different people, and then I just started talking to some people, and I just said, assalamu alaikum, and then I met someone that could speak very broken English, and then they love cricket, in
yes.
Bangladesh, and I said, I'm from Australia. And they said, cricket. Oh, wow. I said, great. So that gave us an immediate bond.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started talking to these people, and then they said, you're from Australia? I said, yes. And they said, we'll come to and I'm doing some inverted comma marks now, come to the Australian camp.
Oh.
So I went to the Australian camp, and the Australian camp had about 10 people, and they also had broken English. But
they weren't Australians.
Someone once lived in Australia, and they had a sister that, I don't know, went there once.
So there's a tenuous link to Australia, and that was the Australian
so
area.
I was amongst my Australian parents, yes. And so once I arrived there, and then I started asking questions about Islam, and I showing genuine interest about religion and trying to understand and what this was all about. And then they were thinking, oh wow, we've got someone here that's really wants to learn, and then from there I kind of almost got escalated to another tent, which where I met this I think it's an imam, a religious leader, and who was from the UK, and he was then talking to some followers about Islam, and I then came and asked questions, and he was like, oh wow, this is great, I've got someone to learn and teach, and another potential follower, and then I don't know. I think he seemed quite impressed with my little bit of knowledge of Islam and a bit of the reading that I'd done, and impressed with my desire to learn. And then, so from there, I then said, I got escalated again. He said, would you be interested to speak with some university students or meet with them? And I said, that'd be great.
Why not?
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. And I can help teach them English and help tell them about what Australia is like. And so we walked a little way over to this other tent, and we walked in the back of this tent, and then it was quite a noise. It was almost like a bit of a roar, and I was like, oh wow, something's happening. So I walked sort of in, and then I realised I'm now on a stage.
Oh,
yeah, it's long. And then I kind of, it was all sort of happening quickly, and there's people around me, and it's all much as a bit of a sensory overload, and I'm being overwhelmed with lots of different people, and I'm being treated again a bit like the diplomat that I am.
Of course, well deserved.
Yeah, and I walk into this forum, and then there's 20,000 university students that have come to learn from this imam about the teachings of Allah and the Quran, and learning about Islam. And I'd been sent from Australia by Allah, according to the imam, to show and demonstrate the wonderful power and the goodness of Allah. And so I was sitting there, and I can speak 4 words in Bangladeshi and Arabic language, and then I can hear this imam saying something. Australia, Allah has sent Australia from Matthew. Australia has been sent, Allah, Australia, and this was going on, and I just said, praise be to Allah, and then everyone was just standing up and shouting and yelling and saying, wow, I'd been sent from Australia, and they're all wanting to come and, touch me and think that I'm some like demigod. And I was like, oh, wow. And then and then it just sort of escalated, and they sort of just started getting louder. And then I sort of thought, oh, wow, this is a bit overwhelming, really.
I can imagine that.
This is going on. And then this went on for, an hour or so. And then they asked me to speak because I was the guest speaker at this forum now. And then I just couldn't really say anything. I just said, praise be to Allah, and I hope they have a good Estema, and I look forward to maybe meeting some of them, and that was it. and then we went off, and and hopefully they had a good Estema.
I'm so too. Oh, no way. That's amazing. What I want to say, what a special experience. It's not something you can go out and deliberately find.
I haven't sort of seen this on a tour brochure yet.
No, exactly right. Yes, that's right. Yeah. But it's a very good testament to the kind of experiences you can gain just by taking the risk and chatting to people, and and I guess being the only tourist in the country helps too.
That's it. Yeah, I was a bit of a novelty, I think, and it's also a testament that people really are. When you travel, people really are kind people, and they were very much welcoming into their homes and wanting to. I mean, the longer version is I was taken into many people's houses to have tea, and many people wanted me to get married to their daughter, perhaps because they wanted to have a good husband for their daughters, and have enormous amounts of tea that I'd had with people, and once I told them that I liked cricket, and I jokingly said that I was friends with Ricky Ponting and Shane Warne, and that escalated my stature even further. Oh,
my goodness.
And then I was just, I got invited to people's weddings and to pray with people. It was incredible that, the kindness of genuine strangers, and they didn't know. And, very overwhelming and very humbling to have that kindness, and particularly in Bangladesh, it's a country with people with very little means, and but big hearts. So you learn a lot from people and experiences like that.
I think being invited into people's homes and being offered cups of tea definitely qualifies as a random act of travel kindness. Offering your daughter's hand in marriage is probably not the kind of random act of travel kindness I'm going for, but it's just an indication of how kind the Bangladeshi people were during Matt's visit. So, as always, he has really great stories to tell. And I now want to move on to my second guest, and it's Cheri Shanti. She's appearing on the Thoughtful Travel podcast for the first time today, and we chatted a lot about her experiences in Cuba because she now kind of bases herself in Cuba for much of the year. But in fact, these random acts of travel kindness happened in Thailand and in North America. I suspect that she would admit they happen all across the world, but these are the examples that Cheri gave me when we chatted.
When you're traveling and you're really just out there in the world, sometimes the most amazing, magical things can happen when you least expect it. And on the note of the kindness of strangers, it was kind of an interesting story. I was biking, actually, by myself through Thailand. And I had been biking for several days, and it was a really, really hot day. And I was up sort of in these mountainous area near a jungle rainforest lodge that I was riding to. Yeah, it was crazy. Biking through Thailand by yourself as a woman, I don't recommend it, even though I had a great experience and everything was good. I still think it's a little crazy now when I look back on it, but when we're young, we're wild. It was awesome. So I was riding one day and it was super hot, and I remember thinking to myself, man, I really need a hat. Like, the sun is just so intense. I really need a hat. And so I pulled off and this is also a story about how miracles can happen when you're just open to receive and you don't try to think and figure things out too much. So I pulled over at this gas station really to get water and kind of have a drink and just cool off. And the craziest thing, as I was walking out of the bathroom back to my bike, this little girl, she was probably 8 or 9 years old, randomly. She had no idea. I didn't speak Thai. She had no idea, that I needed a hat or whatever. She just walked over to me with a baseball cap in her hands and handed it to me. Oh. And I just kind of had this moment thinking, wow, this is so divine. And this is such an answer that we can receive exactly what we need if we just tune in and really be open, stay open. So she gave me this baseball cap and I tried to hand her money. I was like, wow, how did you know I needed a hat? That's amazing. And she wouldn't take it. She was just like, no, it's a gift, it's for you. And she didn't speak English, but you can interpret things in other languages. Yes. And it was so sweet. So it was such a kind, generous, sweet offer. And I just put the hat on my head and I took a picture with her and I together and went on my way. And it was a beautiful gift.
That's beautiful. I love those kind of just really small random moments. I lived in Japan for a couple of years and it seemed to happen often there. And I'll never forget, I was on the train one day and I was in a kind of a semi-rural part, kind of outside of the city. And, one of those places when there's very few foreigners. And I went to get off the train. And as I was getting off, a lady who'd been sitting kind of opposite me, and I hadn't spoken to her or anything, just rushed up to me and reached into her bag and pulled out a mandarin and gave me the mandarin. And for no real reason other than that I was a foreigner and she wanted to give some gesture of kindness, I suppose. And I'll never forget that mandarin. So, yeah.
I was biking with a friend of mine through Washington and Oregon. We did this bike trip we went all the way up to Vancouver Island, and then came back down to Oregon, to Portland. And I got really sick at some point. We were riding in the rain, because it's always kind of moist and rainy there. And I was really, really, really sick with a fever, super high fever. And at some point, I just couldn't go on. I pulled off the side of the road and I don't really even remember what happened because I was so delirious with the fever. But what I know is that I woke up and I was in this really comfortable bed. It was just so plush and so comfortable and I was so warmed and I felt so much love, even though I felt really sick. And I looked around and I was like, wow, where am I? I have no idea where I am. And apparently I had passed out with the fever. Oh, no. My fever had gotten so high that I completely passed out, and a truck came by and my friend waved the truck down, and these people took us to their home, put us in the truck, carried me in their house. I guess they just totally took care of me. I don't even remember, but apparently they fed me soup and they just totally nursed me back to health. And we stayed at their home for 3 days until I was well enough to be able to ride on. And they were just the nicest family. And that kind of thing happened several times along that trip where people would bring us into their homes and feed us. And, they just thought we were crazy, of course, biking through these beautiful areas in Oregon. And again, this is many years ago. And it was just such a generous thing to just know that people will help each other and take care of someone, even a stranger, when they have the opportunity. So I think those experiences just really are blessings when you're traveling.
I particularly like Cheri's second story because sometimes before I travel, especially if I'm the only adult there, if I'm traveling just with my son, sometimes I worry what would happen if I got sick? How would we deal with that? And it's really reassuring to hear tales like that when Cheri was so sick that she passed out and doesn't even remember what happened, but she woke up and was being well cared for by strangers who looked after her for several days. And I really think that although we sometimes worry about strangers, nearly all strangers are very good people. And I don't think we need to spend much time worrying at all. So I love that story. Now, my final guest today is Joanne Karch, and we chatted about the kinds of kindnesses that happened to her and her husband when they've been walking on the Camino.
When we were walking the Camino, we actually walked it twice, but this time we were walking the French Camino from Pamplona, and we left before breakfast, so we were leaving Pamplona, going to a little village where we knew there was a bakery. We had to go off the path to the bakery, told there was good coffee and pastries, which is, good to set your day going.
Definitely.
We walked a little bit further than we were expected, and we're disappointed to find out that the bakery wasn't going to open for at least 10 minutes. And I know for most people 10 minutes isn't very long, but when you've got 20 Ks of walking ahead of you, we were a little bit upset about that, but that's fine. Not really very long. We settled into wait, sat on a chair, and the shopkeeper saw us with our backpacks, and she actually opened up for us early.
Oh.
So that we wouldn't be inconvenienced. She said, no, come in. And it was a great inconvenience to her because she had all the locals lining up as well, and they marched in as well at the same time. So, I mean, it's only a little bit of kindness, but it set us up for the day and made us feel, comfortable with getting on with the next stage of the day.
Oh, I think a little bit of kindness does go a long way. It's a lovely example.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, others are also small examples. When we were doing the Portuguese Camino, it was harvest time, and we'd often see people with their, or outside of houses, we'd see the walnuts in their shells laid out to dry on canvas sort of mats on the ground. And I was busy taking a photograph of the nuts on the ground. An old man came out, and we didn't have Portuguese. We can speak a bit of Spanish, but not much Portuguese. Next minute, he's thrusting 2 enormous handfuls of nuts in our hands. And, that wasn't the intention at all. All I was asking for was, can I take a photograph? And we had snacks given to us for the rest of the walk for the day, which was lovely.
Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah, so I know you're keen on possibly walking the Camino at some stage.
Very keen.
I just found in Portugal anyway, the people were so friendly and so helpful. Another family, we were walking through some fields, and they were harvesting the grapes for wine. And there's a whole family from a baby right up to the granddad who was just sort of sitting under a tree. And they'd stopped for lunch, and the next minute we're sitting eating lunch with them, having a glass of wine and having some of their traditional food, which was just magic, absolute magic. I had to tell my husband to stop walking, come back. We've been invited for lunch.
That's a good reason to stop walking, I think. That sounds lovely.
Yeah. So I think that's probably most of the stories that I've got. Another one, we walked past some houses. They all have their own little wine presses underneath their house.
Oh, cool.
Not all of them, but obviously some of them. And we'd walk past one, and I thought, why didn't I ask them how it worked? Why didn't I go in and see how it worked? So the next time we walked past one, I said to my husband, no, we're going in there. Let's just talk to him. The next minute we're peering into the vats and we're watching how it's made, and he's telling us about the fermentation. And then he produced a bottle of sparkling wine for us to have with our dinner, which was just really special.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. I always imagine that along the Camino trails that they must have, hundreds of people walking by, but obviously they still have the time to be kind to everyone.
I think that's the difference between perhaps the French route and the Portuguese route. The French one wasn't quite like I've described. Most of those examples, excepting for the bakery, was the on the Portuguese.
Right.
And we were still a little bit unique. They didn't see that many pilgrims walking past, and they didn't really know what we were about. So they were happy to talk to us and to share our experience with us. I know a couple of times on the Portuguese we took some washing in. We often stayed in a small hotel or a place where we could get a double room, and we asked them to do our washing, and more than once it came back ironed.
Oh, no way.
For no charge.
Oh.
And it was just like, no, we meant to pay, but... so it was really special.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes, you probably don't need everything ironed beautifully when you're just out there walking, do you?
No, that's right.
Oh, how lovely. Oh, that's interesting. So, yeah, particularly where there's fewer tourists or fewer walkers, then the people have, understandably got even more time to help you out. How lovely. What lovely experiences, and these random acts of travel kindness, just these small gestures throughout a trip. They really add up to just such a warm, fuzzy feeling, don't they? And I'm very happy to hear that some of them happen on the Camino like that. My son and I often speak of walking one of the Camino trails at some stage in the future. His legs need to get just a little bit longer, although he's pretty good at keeping up with me these days already. But one day we'll get there. Anyway, that's it for these random acts of travel kindness. I hope they've given you a little joy and maybe reminded you of some of the random acts of kindness that have come to you over the course of your travels. If you can think of some that you'd like to share, pop over to our Facebook group. It's at Thoughtful Travellers on Facebook, and there'll be a link in the show notes as well if you want to have a look. Oh, and if you want to do a random act of kindness for me, here's my random act for the week. Share this podcast with someone that you think would like to listen, whether it's this episode or the whole podcast in general. Flick them an email or tag them on Facebook, or do something to share my podcast if you think of someone that you think would enjoy it. Thank you. I'll be so appreciative of that. Now, a big thank you to our sponsor, Cheri China, for helping us out with this episode and all this month. In fact, I really appreciate that. You can find them at careerchina.com. As for our guests, you can find Matt at HimalayanSchoolies.com. Remember, he has these trips where you can send your teenagers to the Himalayas instead of to somewhere scary where, I don't know, where they're going to get drunk with their friends. Himalayan Schoolies sounds far superior to me. You can also look up Cheri Shanti at her site, thebreathofcuba.com. She has a really awesome book, part 1 of a series called The Breath of Cuba. And I'm fascinated by Cuba, as I think probably many of you are. So well worth a look. And lastly, I spoke with Joanne Kutch, and you can find her at travelwithjoanne.com. Her website and her blog there talks a lot about the suburbs of Sydney. So if you're in Sydney and having a wander around and want to see something that's a bit off the beaten track, then definitely her site is the one to look at. If you are on Twitter, come and chat with me at Amanda Kendall. You can use the hashtag ThoughtfulTravelPod. And don't forget our Facebook group, of course, as well, Thoughtful Travellers. All of these details and more are on the show notes, and the show notes for this episode are at notaballerina.com/88. Thank you very much, as usual, for listening. I really appreciate it. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.